You think you'd have made it past 30. Most people do. Strip away the vaccines, the antibiotics, the clean water, the stitches for a wound that today needs 6. Now ask yourself honestly which decade you die in. The answer is earlier than you want it to be, and the reason isn't the one you're picturing. Here's the number everyone repeats. Life expectancy in the ancient world, somewhere around 30 years. And here's what almost nobody tells you about that number. It's not measuring what you think it's measuring. It doesn't mean ancient humans hit 30 and dropped dead of old age. It means something far stranger, and honestly, far more specific. Let's find out what it's actually counting. Life expectancy at birth is an average, and averages hide catastrophes inside comfortable-looking numbers. Imagine 10 ancient people. 4 of them die before their 5th birthday. One dies giving birth at 19, the other 5 live to 55, 61, 68, 72, and 74. Add up every age at death. Divide by 10. You get a life expectancy in the low 30s. Not one of those 5 long-lived people died young. The average just ate their decades and hid them behind the children who never got a chance to have any. This is the single most important fact in ancient demography, and it's genuinely astonishing how rarely it gets said out loud. The killer wasn't age. The killer was childhood. In many pre-modern populations studied by anthropologists and paleodemographers, somewhere between a third and half of all children born never reached age 5. Not from war, not from predators, the dramatic stuff documentaries love. From ordinary childhood. Diarrheal disease from contaminated water. Respiratory infections with no way to treat them. Malnutrition during a bad season that a growing body simply couldn't absorb. A minor infection that a modern parent wouldn't think twice about, treated with nothing but time and hope. This is not primitive negligence. Ancient parents were not careless. They were fighting a war with no weapons, no antibiotics, no germ theory, no understanding of why the water sometimes made an entire household sick at once. Just observation, instinct, and the brutal math of trying to keep a small, fragile body alive through years when almost everything could interrupt that. Once you understand this, the died at 30 number stops sounding like a description of ancient adulthood and starts sounding like exactly what it is. A body count of childhood, smuggled into a statistic about lifespan. Now let's talk about the second major filter because it's specific to half the population and it's rarely given the weight it deserves. Childbirth. For most of human history, giving birth was one of the most dangerous things a woman could survive. Hemorrhage, infection, obstructed labor with no surgical option, a breech position with no intervention beyond waiting and hoping the body sorted itself out. Skeletal evidence from ancient burial sites shows women dying in their late teens and 20s at rates that dwarf male mortality in the same age bracket, and the pattern lines up precisely with peak reproductive years. This wasn't rare misfortune. It was a recurring, expected risk every single pregnancy carried. For every woman. In every generation. For tens of thousands of years. The reason this matters for the bigger picture is simple. If you strip out childhood deaths and maternal deaths, the age at death curve for the people who make it past both filters changes dramatically. This isn't speculation. It's visible directly in the bones. Which brings us to the third filter. And this one is almost invisible in popular imagination. Infection. Here's a question worth sitting with. What actually kills you if you get to skip the diseases of childhood and survive childbirth? The answer, overwhelmingly, is something that today would barely interrupt your week. A cut that gets infected. A broken bone that never sets cleanly and festers. A tooth abscess left untreated, spreading into the jaw, and eventually into the bloodstream. Archaeological remains show ancient humans with dental disease so severe it would have caused constant, unrelenting pain. The kind that today ends with a single appointment and a course of antibiotics. In the ancient world, it could end with sepsis. And sepsis, before antibiotics existed at all, was close to a death sentence with no negotiation. This is genuinely the part people miss. It wasn't lions, it wasn't warfare, though that existed too and took its own toll. It was infection, the quietest and most ordinary killer imaginable, doing what infection always does when nothing exists to stop it. So here's the reframe. If childhood, childbirth, and infection were the three filters doing almost all the damage, what happened to the people who made it through all three? They lived. Genuinely, meaningfully lived. Skeletal populations across hunter-gatherer and early agricultural societies consistently show individuals reaching their 50s, 60s, and 70s. Not as freak exceptions. As a normal, expected outcome for anyone who cleared childhood, survived their reproductive years, and avoided a fatal infection along the way. Once you were past the gauntlet, your odds looked remarkably close to what a person a few centuries ago could expect, long before died at 30 became the popular shorthand for the entire ancient world. And these older individuals mattered enormously. Grandmothers who had already raised children and now helped raise grandchildren, freeing younger women to have more offspring and improving those children's odds of survival. Elders who carried accumulated knowledge about which plants healed and which killed. Where water stayed safe in a drought, how to read a coming storm. Losing them wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was the loss of institutional memory a group couldn't easily replace. Ancient societies weren't populated entirely by the young because old age was impossible. They were populated overwhelmingly by the young because childhood was a minefield, and the people who got through it became the most valuable members the group had. So, would you have made it past 30? Here's the honest answer. Not because you'd have been weak, and not because 30 was some kind of hard ceiling written into human biology. You'd have needed to survive being a child with no vaccines, no clean water guarantee, and no antibiotics for the ordinary infections childhood throws at every body. You'd have needed to survive childbirth if you were the one carrying that risk, or survive loving someone who was. And you'd have needed a single cut, a single abscess, a single fever to never turn into the wrong kind of infection at the wrong moment. The people who cleared all three of those filters weren't lucky exceptions living on borrowed time. They were simply the ones who got to grow old, the way most humans throughout history eventually did, once the gauntlet was behind them. The tragedy of ancient life was never really about aging. It was about how much had to go right before aging ever got the chance to happen at all.